We are going to transition now. We have ready to speak Professor Olav Lysne. Apologies for pronunciation there, Professor, from Simula Metropolitan. Over to you. Thanks for joining us.
And thanks to you all for inviting me. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Brilliant. And you see the slide as you're supposed to do, with a smiling young man on it. Then I will proceed. Well, my name is Olav Lysne. I'm a professor and director at Simula Metropolitan. Just 2 words on who I am that will shed some light on why I am invited to come. I have been an advisor to the Norwegian government on cybersecurity for, well, 7 to 8 years. I've headed 3 national commissions working groups, and I was a special counsel on 5G and trusted vendors. Currently, I'm a member of the Norwegian Parliamentary Oversight Committee on Intelligence and Secret Services, something that is called EOS-utvalget. And I'm also author of a book which is called The Huawei and Snowden's Questions. It's a book that I've been so fortunate as to discuss with several of those who are in the audience now, and I suspect that that is one of the reasons that I have been invited. Now, what I will try to give you is a perspective on security, cybersecurity, and supply chain security as seen from a small nation in Europe who happens to have a common border with Russia. It is in a particularly interesting part of NATO in that we have for as long as NATO have existed, we have actually been the north flank of NATO, on the east side of NATO, the European part of NATO. But currently, as the situation in Ukraine escalated, our 2 neighboring countries who have been neutral for many, many decades, Finland and Sweden, they changed their status, their security policies almost overnight and applied for membership in NATO. And that is something that will change our situation quite profoundly for some time. Now, what I will talk to you about is how we perceive our dependencies on other larger countries when it comes to cybersecurity. And our dependencies mainly stem from supply chains and service chains. Now, seen from the US, this might seem a bit strange because you have, to a large extent, full control over your own supply chains. But imagine the situation that, let's say, the state of Ohio wanted to control its own supply chains in the digital age. Then you will see a situation in Ohio that is quite similar to what we actually have in Norway. We have to consider who are we dependent on and to what extent do we trust them. So when it comes to supply chains for digital equipment and software, I think that it had been discussed for close to a decade. I think the discussion started more or less in 2012, but it reached the public sphere mainly when this company was the front runner for being the company supplying equipment for the 5G systems in not only in Norway but in large parts of the Western world. And the discussions at the time were, can we trust this company, and to what extent can we actually verify that the equipment that they provide us with is to be trusted? Now, that was a long discussion. That was a difficult one. Norway had experienced for many years, ever since a Norwegian Peace Prize Committee gave a peace prize to a Chinese dissident. We had experienced severe problems with our relations to China. So the Norwegian government was trying to keep a very, very tight balance on how they approached this question. And one of the things that were obvious at the time were that we were, I would say, a group of computer scientists trying to explain to Norwegian government how limited tools we have to actually verify what software and hardware actually does. Still, at the time, we did not have what we would like to call a smoking gun. Huawei had never been caught in the act of doing anything wrong. It was all suspicions. Now, but since this discussion started, I would say in Norway, they started around 2016, we have seen several developments, not regarding Huawei, but there have been several revelations that have made it easier to talk to politicians about these problems. And you will, of course, know some of them very well. Up to the top left here, you see a headline from, I think that is Washington Post, on Crypto AG, which is the company that it turned out, after having been the supplier of crypto equipment to many countries around the world for many, many years, it turned out that they were controlled by German intelligence and by US intelligence. Now, of course, these Germany and US are considered to be friends here in Norway, so that wasn't too serious. But still, after this event, it became clear that what we were talking about as computer scientists is something that could actually be done. It was actually possible to control the infrastructure of other countries through being the supplier of either hardware or software. And down right, of course, is the SolarWinds event. It has all been discussed at length at other venues, so don't think I'm able to teach you anything about that. But at that time, at least, it became clear that it was not only the US and Germany who were able to pull off such things. It was also possible by some forces who were controlled by Russia. Of course, these are not the only events. What you will see here is just what I believe to be the most publicly known events over a course of 18 months, starting from January 2020 to July 2021. And as you can see from this figure, there are many events here, many attacks, some of which have been attributed and some of which have not been attributed. But you can see from this figure that the number of attacks that we know of that are out in the open have increased considerably over this period. And I think I should tell you that this figure is borrowed from a report that was published by ENISA some months ago. Now, the background for these things have been discussed at length in this book here that I wrote. I think it came out in 2017. Some of you will know it. It gives the technical background onto some very sad conclusions. And those sad conclusions are that even if you are willing to invest immense amounts of resources in investigating a piece of hardware or a complex piece of software, you will not be able to completely verify that those who made that hardware and those who made that software did not fool you by including functionality into that hardware and software that was against your own interests. And that goes for hardware and software. There, that is not possible. And a lot of things have been done about that in the years after this book was written. There's a significant increase in awareness, and some of you will also know these reports. In the US in July 2021, there was a threat landscape for supply chain attacks being published by ENISA. And only that was 6 months ago. You will see that the US Department of Commerce and the US Department of Homeland Security issued a report, not with the same flavor, but with some of the same problems as motivating factors. What I've been talking about up till now is hardware and software, and that is actually quite hard, but hard to problems and to handle and to know what to do with as a small country. What I will take you through now, however, is another problem that is related to digital services. And again, this is a problem that I believe is common for all small and medium-sized countries of this world. It may be easier to tackle by the US, but for Norway, this is very difficult. And I suspect that it could have been also for Ukraine, and I will return to that later on in this talk. I will just start with an example here now. Now I will start with something that I'm sure many of you have done many times. Assume that you simply go into a shop and you buy something and you go to the counter, and in order to pay, you pick up your mobile phone and then you just tap the counter and you pay, or whatever you do. You use Apple Pay or whatever you do. And I want you to consider how many companies are involved in making that transaction work. Of course, there is one company making the payment app. And then there is another company, maybe another company, who built the mobile phone. In the case of Apple Pay, of course, that will be one and the same, but for most other payments apps, that will not be the case. In order to make that work, you have to be connected to a mobile service provider. So that's the third company. But the mobile service provider, what they own are a set of base stations. In order to make those base stations work, they have to be connected to a regional network provider. And of course, while I'm talking to regional network provider, we all understand that in a second, I will be talking about a nationwide network provider, which the regional network has to be connected to in order to work. So then I have to go through a nationwide network provider. I'll have to enter another regional network provider before I reach the server of the bank. Now, if the payment goes between two banks, then of course that bank has to contact the other bank. So that bank server will again have to contact the regional network provider, who contacts the nationwide network provider again through another regional network provider, and then you end up in the other bank. And of course, it doesn't stop there. There are now 11 entries in my list. Some entries are duplicates. The nationwide network provider is there in 2 places, but the complexity of the situation doesn't stop there, because no bank will transfer funds between 2 accounts unless there has been done some authentication. They have to make sure that they're actually talking to the right person or to the right company. So there is another service chain or value chain, if you will, for authentication that is somewhat simpler than the first service chain that I just explained to you, but it's definitely there. And it doesn't stop there either, because all of these companies that you see doing these things, they are companies who do what commercial companies typically do. They find out what is their core business and what is not their core business. Typically the management of their IT infrastructure, that is outsourced. So the very, very simple thing you did when you were going to a shop and bought a baguette or whatever you were buying, it can very easily involve, in order to get that transaction through, it can very easily involve more than 20 different companies. Now, this is a thought experiment. This is basically trying to figure out on the back of an envelope how things will actually look. But let's take a quick look now at the realities. In our lab here in Oslo, we took two apps that were both from the financial sector. One is called Vipps, which is simply a payment app that is some basically identical to what I've just described to you. And the other is DNB. Now, DNB is a bank here in Norway that has Norway as its main market, and it's owned and based in Norway. And what you see here are measurements that were made by putting mobile phones, an iPhone and an Android phone in the lab, and measuring what these apps basically did on these phones, who and what service and what servers around the world did these apps connect to. And we found that approximately 25 to 30% of the addresses that these apps reached out to in doing what they were supposed to do, only 25 to 30% of those addresses were based in Norway. Most of them were actually based in Sweden, for reasons that I don't bother to explain to you now. It's not important. approximately between 5 and 10% were based in the US, which is quite far off. And then 3 or 4% typically goes to Denmark, to Finland, to Great Britain, to Germany, and to Ireland, respectively. So what we see here is that what I believe to be a very typical situation for a small to medium-sized European country, in that when it comes to core digital services, those services have an international footprints that spans very much of the globe. Now, where does that leave us? Well, from one point of view, this is not very dangerous, as seen from Norway. And the reason for that is that all of these countries we see here are considered to be our friends. At present, we can say that all of them either are or will soon become NATO members. Sweden is now soon going to become a NATO member. But there are many sides to this that sort of challenges us in a world that we now perceive to be very unstable. And I think I can be honest enough now to say that to an basically American audience, that not many years ago, many people in Europe were wondering how committed the US was to NATO. And then, of course, what we're now discussing would look very different. So what kind of threats does that give us as a small country? Well, of course, threats will be there in intelligence. There is almost nothing you can do in Norway as a Norwegian that does not generate digital traces around the globe for this reason. What kind of traces we do not know. Basically, we see where these apps, what service these apps contact. We do not know very much about what information goes there, but we know that a lot of information about what we do in Norway is transmitted abroad. So intelligence is definitely a problem in this area. Second, in a challenging global situation, availability of key services is becoming important for us. We have to ask ourselves now, and we are increasingly asking ourselves, who controls our license service? And that goes not only license service for obvious things like Windows or iOS or anything, but license service for anything, also for equipment that controls our critical infrastructure. We are in a situation where we understand now that very large parts of the Norwegian critical infrastructure depends on fiber infrastructure that is not Norwegian. That is not under Norwegian jurisdiction, and it is not placed under on our soil. And of course, as you will understand from what I told you, we have exactly the same things with the same problem when it comes to server parks. We do not know and we do not control which server parks we are generally dependent on. And of course, when I've been talking about something that is close to confidentiality and intelligence, to availability here, you know also that I will be talking about integrity, and definitely there is an integrity problem here as well. Misinformation through control over services and servers are something that we need to worry about, and of course also technical disruptions as a result of people tampering with configurations. Now, when I wrote the book on the Huawei and Snowden questions, what I did there was to go through the question of what can we know about hardware and what can we know about software. What I'm trying to understand now is we are still a small country, like most European countries are in this respect. So the similar question when it comes to services is, can we verify control over services? And by verify, I mean verify in a hard sense. not verify in in the sense of reading through contracts and a legal sense where the question is where what you basically do is to scrutinize documents. It can be really verify what is going on and verify that we have control over things. And that turns out to be surprisingly difficult. At least as difficult as it is to verify what hardware does. The first question that I just showed you an example of just previously. Can we check who my application actually contacts? Well, to some extent I can. I can at least check that in the first hop, because I can see the address of the IP packets that are being sent out of my application, for whatever application we're talking about. Of course, we are more interested in applications that run critical infrastructure than we are in applications like that contact Facebook, for instance. Is contact with a given server mandatory for correct operations of your application? Well, yes, that is something we actually can check. We can put equipment in our lab, we can block out some IP addresses, and we can see if it still works. So this is something we actually can verify. What about geolocation of a server? When we see that there is an IP address that is being contacted, can we find out where the server on the other end of that address actually is? Well, almost yes to that one. It is surprisingly hard, but a lot of things can be done. There are registries that you can look at, and when you do not trust those registries, there are possibilities of triangulating based on the speed of light and by delays. So there is an almost yes to that question. Can we verify who actually controls the server? Well, the answer is no. We cannot. We do not know. There we are left to the notion of trust again, and the trust is of course important here as well. Can we verify the paths of communication back and forth to the server so that we can check who is actually able to listen in the communication? Well, to some extent, again, yes, but our insight into that is limited. And our means of decision over this is also limited. There are also details that can be filled in there, but I don't have the time to go through all of it. Can we control that we have stable communication to a server? Well, yes, to some extent that can at least be influenced by us having multiple paths. But again, if the server is in the US, it is hard for us to know that we have stable communication there, because it depends on a service chain where there are many elements that we do not control ourselves. Can we control the leakage of information from a server? No, we cannot. We can use encryption, but as I just told you on the issue of the crypto AG incident, we have then to trust who built our encryption mechanisms. So basically, we cannot do a hard check on whether there is leakage of information from a communication server and neither from a communication channel. Can we do hard tests on integrity of data from a server? Yes, we can actually, if data is duplicated as a place you can trust. So in looking at all of these questions in concert, we see that it is very limited what control we can have over the services on which we are as a nation completely dependent. So the next question again, are we in the same situation now that we were in the early days of the Huawei discussion? Is that we're talking about the problem where we don't really have a smoking gun? Well, to some extent, I would say yes to that. There were, however, some incidents in the early phases of the Ukrainian war that showed that some people were trying to use these service chains as a means of force. And what I have here is somewhat arbitrary, but it's what we have found in the public space. We know that on the 28th of February, Ukraine officials sent letters to urge both ICANN and RIPE to shut down the Russian internet. And it appeared that that actually had some effect, because on 1st of March, the country code top-level domain .ru was suspended from the Council of European National TLD registers, which is called CENTES. However, on the 2nd of March, ICANN answers Ukraine, no, we will not do that. And the reasoning for that was actually quite interesting. What ICANN answered was that this is not good, because the internet is, and these domains are very important in order to get real information into Russia, and that is one main reason why ICANN answered no to this. On the 3rd of March, Cogent sent a note to their customers in Russia about termination on the 4th of March. So there were ICANN's answers were not absolute there. On the 7th of March, Lumen published a statement that they cease operations in Russia. And Lumen is one of the biggest internet service providers globally. I think they're one of the tier ones. But again, 10th of March, RIPE answers Ukraine, no, we will not do what you ask for us. We will keep internet alive in Russia, the parts of the internet that we can control alive in Russia. And the reason why that they gave at the time were similar to the reasons that ICANN gave at the time. Namely that it is important that outside information now reaches into the publications to the public in Russia. Still, on the 11th of March, the London Internet Exchange shut down Russian ISPs. So the requests from Ukraine did have some effect. Now, looking at this list, it appears that we are again in a situation that we can see that it have been done attempts to use service chains as a means to inflict harm to an opponent. But still, we see that the effect of that is mainly very, very limited. Still, as we can see from these questions, it is obvious that neither Russia nor Ukraine controlled ICANN or RIPE. ICANN and RIPE were able to decide for themselves, and still that means that there is power within ICANN and RIPE to inflict harm that they are aware that they can. I will make a leap here into how we understand, how we in Norway, as a NATO country, understand what is happening in Ukraine in cyber. And I'm looking very much forward to listening to the next speaker, so I'll just get quickly through this. What you see now is two articles that both featured in The Economist. And they took completely different angles to what is happening in Ukraine in the cyber domain. To the left, and that's an article from March 1st in 2022, the cyber attacks on Ukraine are conspicuous by their absence, and cyber war is called, it is the dog that has yet to bark. On the 18th of August, however, just about a month ago, there was another article in The Economist where the head of GCHQ said that Vladimir...
this is Brian from the control room, sir. We have to get ready for the team from the Ukraine to come in. So if you can give your concluding remarks, about 2-3 minutes, sir, it'd be appreciated.
I will. Good. So we are trying to understand what is going on in Ukraine, but it's actually hard to understand what is going on, and it is a lot of things that appears to be out of the public domain. So my conclusion so far: there are obviously weaknesses in the service chain, in the same way as that we were identified weaknesses in the hardware supply chains and the software supply chains. But we seem to be in a situation resembling that of supply chain attacks in 2012. We could see the vulnerability of the service chains there, but we saw very few examples of them being exploited. What we